All right. Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Untrodden podcast. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm here with Connor, Counterpoints. He's like a political streamer, live streamer. We're actually live right now. But I wanted to talk to him because he comes from like a different world, online politics, comes from a different political perspective. And yeah, so we're just jumping into it right now.
Sure. Yeah, and then just introducing myself to the people at home. I have a very simple intro, which is I'm a science fiction, political, and philosophy nerd, a Marine Corps and law enforcement veteran, and a never Trump Republican. I was raised by like Reaganite fiscal conservatives who were devout Christians. And so I feel like I actually had like a pretty strong upbringing in Republicanism. And I feel like I was fed the ideals of the Republican Party. Whether or not the Republican Party has ever lived up to those ideals, I think is a different question. And then I am shocked and repulsed by MAGA using populism to effectively, in my opinion, destroy my party. All of the ideals that I thought I was raised with, I don't think anybody gives a shit about them anymore. I think the only way that they do it is they pay lip service to it.
Hmm.
But I actually believed in these ideals and let them guide me throughout my life. And so, like an idiot, I am desperately clinging to the principles and values of my childhood and arguing for them unsuccessfully, mostly to liberals,
Right.
because
Yeah.
liberals are the only people who seem to like give a shit
Maybe.
about the
Hopefully.
Constitution of the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. So you said you've been learning about socialism, diving into some stuff. So what have you got? What have you got so far?
Yeah, so basically, like debating in the Twitch and YouTube political scene, the two main things were the decommodification of basic human need and workers owning the means of production was the definition for Marxist socialism. And then when it came to communism, it's a moneyless, stateless, classless society, which is the Marxist definition of capitalism, or excuse me, communism, as far as I understand it. The problem with that, though, is that I got into a fight with Econoboy recently, and he's like, "Well, actually, there's 10,000 different schools of socialism, and technically, social democracy could be considered
Right.
socialism." And burp, 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 burp.
Yeah.
And so, somebody linked me effectively a 2-hour summary of socialist theory.
Okay.
And what I think unified socialism was a belief that the creation of the working class in the capitalist system has come with oppression.
Hmm.
And so as a result, it doesn't have to be from the working class. There were bourgeois socialists who believed that who believed in socialism even though they knew that they were bourgeois.
Right.
But the whole point of it is to emancipate the working class from the oppressions and contradictions of capitalism.
Hmm.
And so that's where, like, social democracy, weirdly enough, if you made workers comfortable enough through capitalist means and taxation and redistribution, it would fall under that broad definition, but it wouldn't fall under the Marxist definition. And so that's kind of like the contradictions, and that's why we're constantly fighting over these terms.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a good starting point. It's not necessarily wrong. I just feel like I just feel like there's a lot of context and nuance missing from these conversations that like it seems like it's okay, and I had like that kind of perception for a while, and then when you really dig into it you realize that there might be something like worth saving or worth discussing at least here. Because I feel like I guess my main point that I want to argue is that if you say there's like two groups of socialists, we could say, right? There's like the full on Marxist communists, the ones who aren't satisfied with social democracy, basically. And then you have the social democrats. If we say there's broadly those two groups and they have like subgroups or whatever, I think there's a third group that isn't being like understood in that kind of dichotomy. And that's kind of like what I want to argue, like what I want to present. Because I did actually watch the debate, and
Yeah.
it's frustrating because I would say that none of you like, I mean, none of you are really like experts on socialism. None of you have like the full perspective. But what's
I
especially,
this guy listed 30 different authors. I have read 0 of the 30
yeah,
authors that he cited.
yeah. But what I found frustrating is like none of you understand socialism, but also like you're not really discussing like what the real debate is about. Like you're not people aren't being clear about their terms. And so I feel like you were closer to the truth because you were at least trying to actually argue like a historical case and a real case, and that was just kind of being like blindsided. And so yeah, that's kind of like a separate conversation about like how people have conversations online, I guess, and then like why are we not being clear. Because what I find funny is like among socialists themselves, this debate happens over and over again, right? This debate has been
Yeah.
happening since like the beginning of the 20th century, maybe even before that. But I guess the first thing is that, so obviously you probably heard this, but obviously socialism and communism are not necessarily Marx. Like they predate Marx. They're like separate concepts. So we can understand socialism and communism as kind of like these like frustrations under the modern world, and they're just kind of radicalism. I think there's one way of understanding them that way. But then the thing about Marx is that it's like everyone's a Marxist and no one's a Marxist. Like after Marx, everyone plays on Marx, everyone references Marx, everyone pretends to be a Marxist. Some people say they don't want to be a Marxist, but they're still building
Yeah, it's
off
like
of
religion.
response. Exactly right. It's exactly yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's like, "Oh, I'm a Catholic, but I don't practice 80% of the
yeah,
dogma of the Catholic Church." And then other Catholics are like, "Well, you're not a real Catholic then." And then
right,
that person gets sick of being called not a Catholic, so then he becomes an Anglican, and
right,
then, then he gets tired of the Anglican, and then he becomes Baptist, and yeah,
yeah,
it's, schisms,
yeah.
ideological schisms among a dozen lines.
And we could even say that Protestantism is like bound up with the Catholic Church because as much as they want to be different, they only exist in response to the Catholic Church. So that's kind of like how
Dude, I
Marx
told that to a
works.
Protestant, and a Protestant got so fucking mad.
Yeah,
I was like, "The only reason why
yeah,
Protestant churches exist is because the Catholic Church was around for, like, whatever, I don't know,
yeah,
1,000 years, 1,200 years." And then Protestantism broke out of Catholicism, and she was like, "No, you guess I was
yeah.
guess I was
It's just
Catholic
real.
at the
It's just
time.
real
She was like,
Christianity.
"No, you guys are a
It's
bunch of
pure.
pagan Mary worshipers. We have nothing to do with you." And then I actually had to, like, draw a chronology,
Yeah,
like, of the schism.
yeah. It's a long story, but it is really similar to that. It's kind of like you can't really turn back time. Like we can't. People will argue over what real Christianity is, but no one is really a true Christian if we're being honest. Like everything has just been so bound up with the historical process, which is kind of the point, I guess. So it's hard to figure out where to start. I think when you say contradiction in
Well, but
capitalism,
do you agree with the broader definition of, like, socialism, emancipation is what I use, like, as a word for, like, freedom, right?
right?
So socialism is an attempt to free the working class of the oppressions and contradictions of capitalism.
Yeah,
Do you like
I
and there's, like, 10,000 different ways to do that. Do you think that's broad enough and specific enough to encapsulate socialism?
I would say it could be, but I think the problem is that it really depends on how you elaborate on that definition because I think what could happen is that people will hear that and they'll take it in a way that I think is missing what's really important to me. So what I really want to argue here is that
Sure.
there's some nuance that we're not including that I think is important. So this, and I don't know how much in depth you want to go on this, but it has to do with what contradiction means, what Hegel is about, like all of this philosophical tradition. I think there's kind of like a thread that pulls all that together, and I think that thread is missed by the majority of socialists online and the majority of everyone.
Well, I'll just for the sake of back and forth, I'll tell you what I mean, and then I would love for you to expand on what you think is core to the argumentation. What I heard, which I don't know if it's correct, is that communism is the way that most communists kind of view pre-industrial society, where all of the goods of basically like a tribal society were held in common, right? If you needed something, your neighbor would help you, that kind of thing. And so they think that there wasn't class, which I think is ahistorical,
That's
but
really.
whatever.
I just want to note really fast. You should continue, but that is
Sure.
completely wrong for like core Marxist thought. That's completely wrong. That's like a complete bastardization for a lot of reasons. But keep going on. I believe that people
No,
told you
and I
that,
would love to hear
but
why
yeah,
it's
yeah,
bastardization.
yeah,
And maybe this was more motivating like 19th century pre-Marxian
yeah,
socialists. I don't know.
yeah.
But their motivating factor was effectively saying that like industrial society has effectively created these two classes,
Mm-hmm.
the bourgeois and the proletariat. So the people who own the means of production and the people who actually labor and trade their labor for a wage. I don't know if that's totally accurate, but approximate, right?
Right.
And so the contradiction or whatever
Mm-hmm.
is that there's this tension between these two classes that are opposed, but ultimately they're both human,
Mm-hmm.
and so they shouldn't be opposed. They should actually be working. Actually, probably the bourgeois class should be prohibited or dissolved. But ultimately, this tension cannot continue to exist because
Right.
it's effectively economic combat that has
Hmm.
to be resolved at some point.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that part's pretty. That part's okay. That part's good. The problem I have, and I totally believe that people told you this. Like, I'm not blaming this on you, but the idea that pre-society was better, there are people who will kind of gesture in that direction. I think Baudrillard.
Not better, but it didn't have that class
Yeah, right.
conflict.
That idea is kind of, it's like true in the way that it's kind of like saying slavery didn't exist when everyone just murdered each other. It's like, okay, it's kind of like a worthless statement, because what we really need to understand, I think this is one of the key points I want to really like put out here. Socialism comes out of the bourgeois tradition, right? So that's like it comes directly out of that. So when we say bourgeois, there's a way of hearing that where you just say rich people are bad, but there's another way of saying it where bourgeois is liberalism. It's the intelligent, educated classes overthrowing the monarchy in order to emancipate society.
Yeah, they called the American Revolution the bourgeois revolution in that
Oh
piece
yeah, it
that I
is.
was thinking, and I was like, "Oh shit, it kind of is,"
Yeah,
because it
but
was like the landowner merchant
oh yeah.
class,
Hmm.
and they were also talking about, sorry for interrupting, but I did find it really interesting,
No,
and they
it's
were
good.
also
Yeah.
talking about how political representation from liberalism was, like they did like, suffrage,
Hmm.
right? The vote.
Right.
But they actually argued that universal suffrage was a step too far because you were going to
Yeah.
enable the plebeian masses who were going to
Hmm.
capsize society, which is why like early American the concepts of early America was a bourgeois revolution but not a proletarian revolution,
Right.
which I thought was hilarious.
Right, but that's actually understanding what a bourgeois revolution is. Now, these things get all muddled because we have to understand that I would say, and this is a separate conversation, but the failures of the left have created a very like defensive, annoying. I just want to make it clear for everyone. I despise the leftists that you would despise, like the Stalinists, the tanky,
Sure,
like
we're
all these
talking
people.
descriptively.
Yeah, all these people are, but it's not. But they also are kind of like on the defense, and so what they end up doing is they end up like abusing terms, and so no one knows what these things mean anymore. Because really, the bourgeois revolution,
I agree.
from a Marxist perspective, is a historical process. So that's one thing we have to discuss again. Hegel's idea of history. We can get into that a little bit, but it's a necessary historical
Yeah.
process that is leading to greater freedom and emancipation.
And
That's like a crucial point there. Yeah.
well, and that crucial point, it's funny because I actually don't believe in it. Okay,
Oh,
and
me
and
neither.
the and
Yeah.
the reason why is, yeah. So what I understand this, and I could be wrong, and bear in mind you're the subject matter expert who's talked to a dozen socialists at this point. But what I understand, which is funny because this was a Vosh versus who, like Luna Oy and some other creator. They had this
Yeah.
fight,
Yeah.
is Second Thought, something like that.
Yeah.
They had this huge fight where they kept accusing Bosch of being an idealist
Mm.
versus a materialist, and
Mm-hmm.
they said that materialism is core to Marxism, and I
Right.
had no idea what the fuck they were talking about. But what the argument, as far as I understand, is that if you're a materialist, then what you believe is that like we all have these like great man of history
Mm.
analyses of history
Right.
where somebody comes up with an idea out of the ether
Mm-hmm.
and then they implement their will by convincing everyone around them to follow along with it.
Mm-hmm.
But from a materialist lens, everything is material. And so these ideas, they don't emanate from the ether. They emanate from the historical context and the material context in which these ideas are born. And so while we like to think of ourselves as individual agents considering various ideologies to choose from, actually what we are is we're a product of our unique perspective in time and history.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result, all we're doing is we're pushing the ball forward and getting pushback from another team. And so history is not this great men creating ideologies and imposing their will on the world. It's actually just a very chaotic hodgepodge of ideas bouncing off of each other. And the ones that ultimately win out are the ones that make sense to the most amount of people. And I don't even know if that part's true because I think that that might even give people too much agency within this framework.
Yeah, I think it's so. One thing is that the idealist materialist like like dichotomy there is kind of abused. This is another example. I'm gonna say a lot of these oversimplifications are what I would call the vulgarization of Marxism that happened during the Soviet Union, which is basically that the Soviet Union was failing to live up to any of its ideology, and Stalin basically just like turned everything into like the dumbest version of what it could possibly mean, and then people who defend that because the idea is that this was actually existing socialism, so you have to defend it because it existed, and that means thus it's better, and it existed, and so you just have to defend it. And so then you say things like materialism is better, but you don't actually know what materialism means. And the reason I point that out is because like idealism and materialism, like idealism is a German philosophical tradition, which is kind of revolutionized in Kant, and then Hegel is really
Aren't
building
we
off
kind of
of
proving
Kant.
though, real quick, I'm ecstatic to hear what you have to say,
Yeah.
but, aren't we kind of proving why Marxism is never gonna work? Because you have to understand
Well,
10,000 years of,
yeah. I don't
like,
think
not 10,000, but you have to understand, like, 500 years of philosophical tradition in order to be an actual philosophical Marxist, and
yeah.
you have to read all these, like, German and, European
Yeah.
philosophers who all are arguing with each other in order to get to the core of the ideology.
I
Yeah.
think I mean I totally understand that critique, obviously. And I won't say, but I will say that I think these ideas aren't as complicated as they seem. I think it might be. It's possible that if you tried to explain liberalism to like a random peasant in like 1600 or 1700 when these ideas were like barely blossoming, I think you would have to like, well, listen, Locke justifying our natural rights. Let me explain. Okay, but Locke, he's building on this
Okay, but
theological.
natural rights. Okay, but the emperor of mankind.
Yeah, like it's.
Like, I
I do
I
feel
don't
like
I don't know if you're familiar with Warhammer 40K, but, like,
I'm not,
that's
but
how the lore, like, starts is like,
oh yeah,
"Let me tell you about Space Marines. Wait, hold on. Let me tell you about the Primarchs. Wait, hold
yeah,
on. I should tell you about the Emperor of Mankind. Wait, hold on. Let me tell you about the Dark Age of technology." And
yeah.
so, like, you just keep back
But
and back and back and back because it's so
I
dense.
do think there's a phenomenon where ideas can kind of become difficult to understand because of the time and place that we're in. And I guess this is me being kind of a, having kind of a Marxist Hegelian view of history, more Hegelian, but um, there is
Yeah,
a
we're constantly bombarded with information, yeah.
and there is a way in which these ideas I think could be way more easy to understand, and it wouldn't require all this groundwork. Like the reason I have to do all this work is because they're just unfamiliar. But if they were more digested and understood readily, it wouldn't come off that complicated. But I don't know. It's hard to say, and that is kind of the point of having the vanguard party or whatever. Although that can quickly become just authoritarianism and just cope and all that. Um, but I did want to say that I'm not going to go into all of what idealism means because that is a nightmare of a conversation. But really, like the point I was making is that Hegel is building off of Kant, and neither Kant nor Hegel are simply idealists. They're not just idealists. They have more of a nuanced outlook, and Hegel himself has a huge awareness of the contradictions between our thought. That's kind of like the whole point of Hegel, is that we can't resolve things into these neat little packages, right? That's kind of the whole point. And so Marx polemically kind of says, I have to turn Hegel upside down, right? And so what he's saying is that Hegel is all about ideals, and ideas, and we need to have materialism. So this is where that idea comes from, that there's a dichotomy between them. But Marx later in life realized that that was kind of stupid, and that there was actually more in Hegel, and that actually Hegel kind of justifies having a material and idealistic, like it's a complicated interplay. Basically, there's this really complex interplay of ideas and society and the development of history, and this is a really complicated thing. And so I think anytime someone like boils it down to simply just materialism and they are just Stalinist, I think you need to understand that they're kind of failing, and they're kind of rejecting all of the philosophical tradition. They're sacrificing all of that German tradition, all of what Marx thought, all of it. It's just kind of like it's just a failure. And so I just think those people are kind of worth ignoring because they're basically just authoritarians in our conception of what an authoritarian is. And the reason why I think this is important is because I think if you have a Hegelian view of history as a method, and I'm not convinced of it because it kind of implies that there's
Bear in
necessary
mind, this
developments.
stuff is so complicated that I didn't even bother, right? And so,
Right.
if you wanted to say like a Hegelian view of history, the closest thing that I could possibly think about it is like thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and I'm not even sure if I'm citing the right
So
person.
I
You
would
know what I'm saying?
I can boil it down I feel like pretty simply. So when we think about history, there's actually a Kant quote that talks about this. But when we think about history, we really do think of it as, well, I think this is how most people think of it, even like liberals generally. We really think of it as like these horrible things happening, and then like people have personal interests, and then wild things happen, and then they change their mind about things, and it really is just kind of this like random, chaotic cycle. I feel like that's kind of what we view as history, and so the point of Hegel and Kant even is to say that there's a purpose, there's a through line to history. That is really the fundamental point. There's a necessary like development. It kind of imagine it like a person has like a child phase and then they become an adult, and we would say that all those phases are necessary to their development. That's what history is to them. The
Mhm.
idea is that
Okay.
history is like a self discovery of our own freedom. And this is what's really important. Why did Hegel say that freedom was the point of history, or Kant? Because they were bourgeois
I
liberals.
don't
Because they were
know.
bourgeois liberals. Because they were just liberals who didn't like monarchy. So they were
Oh.
liberals who were like, we have to explain why we're gonna have freedom. And so the whole point of their philosophy was we need to justify freedom. And that's why I say that Marxism comes out of that, because Marxism is basically saying Hegel was right about how history develops, and something about capitalism, it's kind of like a malformed necessary but malformed development, and we need to overcome that necessarily. And so the working
Well,
class,
so hold on.
yeah,
But this is a presumption that I think is actually interesting from because we're talking about like what, like 18th century, 19th century, philosophy and all that kind of stuff.
hmm
So what's interesting to me about this is that Edmund Burke is, late 18th century, early 19th century, and he's thought to be the father of conservatism. And I've
exact
referred to myself as a Burkean
right,
conservatism. What's that?
exact same time as Kant is Hegel, like within decades, like right exact same time, yeah.
Right, and so and the reason why is because, I've read a biography about him. I have not read any of his original work because, frankly, I think he was pretty rich in his prose, and also he didn't really, at least as far as I know, he never wrote like a recipe book
hmm
for politics. He
yeah.
just described historical events from the perspective, and then people extrapolated
hmm
his political philosophy from his summary. Like a lot of people say that the best summary of his political purview is his like summary of the French Revolution. But
right,
I don't want to read him just yapping about the French Revolution for 500 pages. I
sure,
want the recipe. You know what
right,
I'm saying?
yeah.
So I read a biography. It was okay, but anyways, correct me if I'm wrong. But Burke actually kind of rejected a bit of liberty and solely freedom as being like the foundational motivation of the human species.
hmm
And so he believed, correct me if I get any of this wrong, that institutions can be flawed, they can be brittle, they can be dystopian, they can be fucked up. However, nested within them, the reason why institutions evolve at all is because they have some degree of utility. And so while an individual can contain their lifetime's worth of wisdom and knowledge, institutions can also oftentimes be generations of wisdom and knowledge accumulated
hmm
within a book like the Bible or an institution like the church or an institution like the monarchy. And so some institutions do need to be eliminated over time. However, the truth is that you don't just cast away that wisdom and institutional momentum instantaneously because that's dumb as shit. You're
right,
effectively casting aside centuries, if not millennia, of wisdom if you don't consider their ideas at all.
hmm
And so, with when it came to Burke, which I agree with this philosophy fundamentally, is that listen to progressives, right? Listen to liberals, listen to Marxists, listen to everybody. But if you think their ideas are bad, or even if you think their ideas are good, needle them, question them, interrogate them, apply them, experiment with them. And what will happen, ideally, is the bad ideas will fall apart like wet tissue paper and will
hmm
not be integrated into society. And then the good institutions will, or excuse me, the good progress will be instituted, and either they will reform the institutions or they will abolish unnecessary institutions. And that's how you I'm using a lot of big words, but that's how you fix the tension that resulted in the French Revolution.
hmm
Because in the French Revolution, you had all these old, brittle institutions that were on the verge of collapse, but
right,
you had people that were unwilling to let them go. And then you had these radical revolutionaries who had no respect for institution or wisdom or the wisdom of the ancients at all. And
hmm
then eventually they fucking implode in a bloodbath. So,
right.
in your opinion, did I miss anything?
I think that's fair. What I would actually say is that Hegel and to some extent Marxism a little bit actually support your view of this, maybe even more than Burke. And the reason is that so
Uh-oh.
Hegel was a huge fan of the French Revolution in its necessity, the historical process, but he was also a huge critic of the French Revolution for a lot of those reasons. And so, what Hegel is really about, first of all, we should understand, we should just put this out there. Hegel is really just a liberal, like within his historical context. Sure,
Based.
he's like a left moderate, basically. He's like left wing. He's not a super insane radical, but he does really like liberalism and democracy to some extent. But he doesn't like too much democracy, so he likes republicanism. Maybe he likes the German monarchy the most, but he likes a form of the German monarchy that's just a republic, basically. Um, so, with all that said, like Hegel is actually really interested in that critique that you talk about, that inner critique, that the dialectic. That's really like the resolving the contradictions. He's really interested in that, and I think that is why he ended up criticizing the French Revolution, but also supporting it. And this is where the Hegelian view of history comes up because I think that my criticism of Burke would be that he doesn't have a large enough view of history. It's kind of just vibes, right? And his vibes might be
Yeah.
correct, but the foundation is shaky, and I'd be wary of that. So when we say like it seems like the radical mob is a bit too psycho and the institutions are kind of corrupt, but like they also have some wisdom, like that's all great. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think we need kind of a philosophical toolbox of grounding out these ideas. And I actually think that Hegel gives a stronger toolbox because Hegel is actually a big fan of institutions. So when he says freedom is the point of history, he also says that there is like spirit or Geist. People always say Geist to say I know German and I know the real word and I'm very technical,
Ghost.
but it really
Ghost
just
spirit.
it just really means like it really, to be honest with you, it just means like societal consciousness or society. And so
The zeitgeist.
what that ultimately means is that the institutions are justified by the spirit of the people. And then over time, the spirit starts to leave. People forget why they supported those institutions, and it ends up being very similar to what you're describing, in that the institutions
I mean,
become
that
corrupt.
actually that feels like the moment that we're in right now, which is
Right.
scary as fuck to me. Is so I was raised with a fairly patriotic narrative, right? Which was America was fucked up in the beginning, but we had all these highfalutin ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to implement these ideas over time, which is why the Civil War is fucked up as it is. It's actually kind of like the epitome of our ideas. We failed in those ideals again by not like following through with Reconstruction, but
Right.
the civil rights era
Mm-hmm.
was kind of us trying to finally implement our ideals for all of mankind, for basically following through on the Pledge of Allegiance. And ultimately, while we are fucked up, we've also achieved a lot of good in the world, like defeating Imperial Japan, defeating Nazi Germany, defeating the Soviet Union in the Cold War. And so as a result, like, you can be proud to be an American. Now, the problem with that is we, in the post World War II consensus, I think they call it, effectively, like, America became the world's police to defeat socialism and communism. And so it's cool that we defeated the Soviet Union, excuse me, but we're still left with all of the contradictions of our own violence in that conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're also left with the new contradictions within the war on terror, which we abandoned a substantive amount of our principles in order to fight the war on terror.
Right.
And so people don't hang on to this patriotic narrative like they did in the 90s.
Yeah, I think that's why I would argue, and I know a lot of this comes off as like overly like random names and German names and all this, but I really think there's something of value to us here, and this is why I'm like obsessed with this, is because
From
I
Hegel.
yeah, or well, or just this kind of this way of viewing history in general, which it seems like Marxists are the people who uphold this the most. But when I say Marxists, I mean
Okay.
about like 5% of them, and none of them are like Twitter posters. So that makes it even more complicated. But so what happened? Just to give you some backstory, is like so I just feel
The
like when
people who have actually read books.
right, well, I just feel like so when you describe like all of those contradictions and confusions, I feel like there has to be kind of an antidote to that, you know? Like it just feels like
Okay.
we're just kind of, and this is kind of how I felt. It just feels like history is kind of just this aimless, chaotic mess that we're trying to make sense of. And it feels like that's kind of you're kind of playing on the defense. Like you're kind of letting history happen to you, I feel like, when you take that approach. And you're not really understanding like what is the fundamental grounding of the direction we're going in? What is the fundamental grounding of what we're doing? It feels like kind of a defensive approach where you're just like looking back. And one of the reasons that I've been interested in this is after Trump won, I was trying to figure out like what is the point of like if people don't believe in liberalism itself, like that's a contradiction itself. Like how can you believe in liberalism so strongly in democracy and then people elect a guy who doesn't like liberalism? It seems like it just seems like what it.
Oh, hold on. But my worldview is not contradicted, because raised as a Republican, I view the vulgar masses as easily susceptible to populism, and so I'm while not being much of a successful business owner myself, I have a petit bourgeois
Yeah.
perspective on the vulgar masses who
Hmm.
are so easily swayed by dictators and false prophets. So for me, there's no contradiction. People are just stupid.
Well, yeah, but I mean, yeah, I know, yeah, I understand that, yeah, I know, but
Like,
I
like Churchill, real quick. Like Churchill says, democracy is the worst form of government,
right.
except for all the other ones.
Yeah, I mean, it's true, but like I always kind of just believed in that, and I was very cynical, and I was like, I guess this is the best it is. Like this is
What,
like,
democracy or representative democracy slash the vulgar masses are stupid?
I mean, yeah, the representative democracy. Like I was always kind of like, okay, I think we need democracy, but we definitely need a democracy that's like a republican. It can't just be like mass democracy. And I guess this is the best
Yep.
form we have. But also, like, what's going on? Like, what are all the problems it's having? And that's where I feel like this view of history is important. And I started because after Trump won, I read this book. I highly recommend it. It's Marx. I think it's his best work. It's very entertaining and interesting, and also a bit scary. But it's called The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. So basically, what happened
Mm.
was I don't know if you know anything about like kind of like the second revolutions after the first French Revolution, but basically
I don't.
Napoleon's nephew, Louis Bonaparte the third, he basically they reinstituted the monarchy after the first revolution. Everyone knows, and then they did another revolution, and then they did a democratic vote. They elected Napoleon's nephew, and then he declared himself emperor in 4 years. so
Right.
so they like reinstituted democracy, and so Marx wrote a book right after he declared himself emperor, called the 18th Brumaire. And what he's trying to analyze is why did this republican culture, this republican country, sacrifice its own values in 4 years? And he has lines in there where he says the Democrats, meaning the left wing moderates, which is kind of ironic that that's exactly what our left wing moderates are called. But he has lines in there where he says the Democrats are appealing to this democracy as if it's this holy idol that will save them, and it's like hollow and empty, and no one's going to come to save them. And he even remarks on how
The
the
yeah, the sorry, this is like wildly important. I know you're making the point, but basically like of what of what value is a republic to a starving man, right? Like of what value are these highfalutin bourgeois ideological, and I don't say bourgeois as like a derisive term,
right.
but I'm saying like if I go to some pissed off like I have truck drivers in my audience.
Mm-hmm.
If I go to some fucking truck driver who's working 80-hour weeks, barely sees his family, he's making a good living, but
Mm-hmm.
he actually has quite an isolated life. And he didn't have a lot of educational opportunities. And on top of that, he's a war on terror veteran where he feels like his own government recruited him to send him overseas so his friends could get killed fighting a war that we had no business in, and then we come home. If I start talking to him about like freedom of speech and freedom of conscience,
Yeah.
he's going to tell me to blow it out my fucking ass. You know what I'm saying? He might like guns, but he likes guns because he likes violence and personal defense. He might say that he believes in the Constitution of the United
Mm-hmm.
States, but if he can't pay his bills, if he can't take care of his family, if he has no dignity, then obviously he's going to be interested in change
Well, believe it or not,
or an upsetting of the modern order.
Marx accounted for that. Okay, he did talk about that in that book. So
Yeah.
Marx basically talks about how Louis Bonaparte, who's this, the thing about Louis Bonaparte is he's like really like he's not special. He's not cool like Napoleon. He's just a loser. Like no one likes this guy. He just like gestures
Right.
broadly in every direction, and he pretends to be a. But here's the really interesting thing: is Marx notes that
Which is
the
funny. That sounds like Trump to me, but
yeah,
continue.
it really does. But what he mentions is that the kind of like like the peasants basically, but not like the worst peasants, but like the slightly higher level peasants who are everywhere.
Mhm.
Though they all supported Bonaparte, and what he argues is that they supported Bonaparte because even though society was getting better in some ways, he harnessed their like dissatisfaction and their contradictory ideals
Yep.
because they did actually want democracy in some way, but they also just wanted to survive and have money, and he kind of appealed to that like idea, and he was able to
Oh,
get them
I only think the reason why Trump's in power is because of economic populism. And
right.
what's funny is like his policies don't do anything to resolve the
Right.
malaise that he appeals to, which is so funny to me because people are like, "Oh, Trump's going to bring back manufacturing." No, he's not. Trump's going to improve wages.
Yeah.
No, he's not. That was like an accident of the economics of the time. And so, he's going to fight tooth and nail for trickle down economics that we've been running for 20 or 30 years, which is effectively just cut taxes and let business owners do whatever business owners want to do.
Hmm.
That's effectively his economic policy. And so we'll probably see a boom, but that boom isn't going to make it all the way down to the lowest classes amongst us.
Well, that yeah,
And there's probably going to be fallout related to it.
yeah, for sure.
So,
But that's kind of the point
bruh,
is that France at that time was a fast like a huge modernizing country. They were at like the forefront of society, or like up there with like England, like secondarily maybe, but they were like modernizing. They were making a ton of money. They were becoming very capitalist. And Marx remarks about how the right wing ended up just becoming like moneyed interests. Like they gestured toward monarchy, but they didn't really care about that anymore. Like that's kind of boring. Like they already kind of gave up on that.
yeah, they just needed the symbol.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of the point, is that Louis Bonaparte can gesture towards all these things, but really what's holding the country together is like the capitalist like structure and just like money coming in, and then the state becomes this kind of amorphous. Really what Marx is talking about in this book is the modern state. The modern state becomes the figurehead doesn't really matter. The system is just kind of this mess of different interests fighting each other. There's the class struggle kind of built into it. That is an aspect of it, and everything is just
But that's why I
muddled.
like liberalism and capitalism is because sorry if I'm interrupting and jumping ahead, but that's one of the things that I like about liberalism and capitalism is like, oh, all these people are fighting all the time, and there's all
Right.
these oligarchs who are ripping each other to shreds, and there's all this creative destruction, and I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the beauty of the system. Like, yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
it sucks. It sucks to be a working class schlub working for a megacorp that creates some brand new technology that totally revolutionizes society, like Amazon.
Hmm.
And then you watch not Bill Gates, you watch Jeff Bezos literally divorce his wife, give his wife a
Yeah.
country-sized GDP of money
Yeah.
for fun, marry an Instagram model, start doing steroids, and fly into space.
Right.
If you're an Amazon stock worker, that has to be fucking infuriating, right?
Hmm.
But at the same time, if you're a consumer, then Amazon has revolutionized the logistics supply chain in the past 30 years in a way that's almost unthinkable,
Right.
to the point that I'm 3D printing shit in my house and I can order a 3D print filament at 6 p.m. and have it delivered to my house at 10 p.m. That's fucking bananas.
It
Like
is.
that's
It is pretty
crazy,
crazy. Yeah.
right? And so do I want Amazon workers to be pissing in bottles in order to make their quotas when they're doing 16-hour days in order to pay their bills while
Probably
they're
not.
living out of a Volvo in Seattle, Washington? Probably not. But do I want my 3D printed filament delivered to my house by 10 p.m. when I ordered it by 6?
Right.
Yeah. Like
But
so
that,
what do you do with that?
I mean, you could
And
say
I
that,
would say just give the workers a dignified state of living. That's what I would say.
and you could say that is like a manifestation of the contradiction, but that's that's kind of begging the question a bit in a few ways. But I would say there's like two ways of responding to that. So one is that I think you still have to address the question of like we really have to address the question of, is there something better than this, and how would we figure out that there's something better than this? And I think that's where the conversation needs to be at, and it just like never feels like it is. And then the second thing is that I still feel like there's a danger in having this view of history that's very defensive, like I said. So there's another part in the 18th Brumaire. It's like the end. I think he
Oh, you could
mentions
get
it.
outflanked by people thinking creatively about the next step. 100%. Like
Right.
if you're
But
constantly on the defensive and you're defending the status quo, that's actually, in my opinion, that's part of the failure that led to the French Revolution, is people clinging to brittle institutions,
yeah.
meanwhile not realizing everybody's getting radicalized around them. And that's where I'm increasingly alarmed within my position.
Hmm.
Because yeah, dude, I've been working class my entire life, or lower middle class my entire life. It fucking sucks. But overall, I've had a pretty good life. And so like I'm trying to defend it, but I'm seeing the far right say, well, there's too many brown and black people, the economics suck, we're getting fucked over, we're
Hmm.
getting fleeced by the world. Let's cut 0.16% of the budget and
Yeah.
kill 14 million people through preventable disease.
Yeah. But that's
What the fuck?
that's kind
That's
of my point.
crazy.
That's kind of my point is that we really
Yeah.
have to get we have to figure out why that is, right? And so I'm not saying the socialists
Well,
are
and then,
right.
but then I also see the far left, and they're like, "We have the solution. The
Well,
solution is to shoot your local landlord."
here's what I
And
come
I'm
to
like,
bring as the ambassador. Here's the message I come to bring.
"Sure,
It's possible that there's a critique that we can deal with and engage with that isn't either of those, because I think we can. I think the far left you're talking about, I think a real socialist, and I have heard them say this, the people I've interviewed, a real socialist will say those leftists are, they're just lost. They're an expression of like the downfall of everything. They're stuck within the system. They're just radicals, and they'll actually tell you. And
I was about to ask the we're talking about the violent ideologues.
yeah, basically, yeah, because they'll actually tell you, and they'll use Lenin to justify this point. I know we think of Lenin as like the
Hold on
super
1 second.
violent.
I have to yell at my chat.
No problem.
You should hear this actually.
Okay.
Connor, are you going to interview your guest or keep interrupting? We're having a conversation. We both have autism.
True.
Okay, so
True.
he knows a lot. I like to think I'm an insightful person, but I don't like to be proselytized to. So while I appreciate his intelligence and knowledge, I want to have a conversation. I just want to sit here for a fucking hour. If you want to listen to him and you just want to hear an interview of him, go to the Untrodden podcast.
Highly recommend it.
Untrodden
Great show. Highly recommend
podcast.
it. Good fan.
Subscribe to it. Watch it.
Mm-hmm.
He expands for hours about all his beliefs over there.
Not as much.
Sounds
Actually.
like you would be a fan, LB.
I get
You
talked over on
fucking
there a lot
smart
too, to be
ass.
honest with
All
you.
right,
But
sorry. Back to the conversation.
yeah, no, I appreciate having back and forth. It's good. Yeah, I also don't like. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from on that. But yeah, I mean, I just think
Well, and LB and I have a contentious relationship, so
that's
this is
fair.
just the nature of our relationship.
That's fair. Yeah, I understand. What I was gonna say is they'll actually use Lenin to make this point. That I heard two of these guys talk to each other. Two of the Marxists that I've talked to and who I find very useful. They kind of hate each other. They have huge disagreements, but they both agreed, and they both used Lenin to justify it. That supporting Luigi is not good and pointless. And the reason they use Lenin to justify it is because Lenin talks about how terrorism is bad political strategy. It's bad, like forget about morally. It's just bad in every way, and there's no point to do it. And so they talked about how supporting Luigi is really aimless and pointless, and these people don't like each other, but they both agreed on that important point. And so what I want to argue is that there really is
Wait, sorry.
this
Who said that? Who said that terrorism was pointless
Lenin,
or counterproductive or unproductive?
Lenin. They were using Lenin.
What an irony.
Well,
And then sorry, my chat is, well, I'll let you explain the irony. They're saying that they're getting lost because I'm interrupting too much, and I'm also using a lot of internal information in order to like jump ahead of where the audience is. But if I had to say what's missing from this conversation, or not missing, but a summary of this conversation is the schizo left, the aggressive left,
mm-hmm,
are not the true ideologues. They actually don't know the philosophy that well.
right.
They are a vulgar representation of the philosophy.
Mm-hmm,
The philosophy is rooted in Kant and also a whole bunch of German philosophers of the time who would actually pretty aggressively disagree with a lot of modern leftists.
mm,
That so far, modern leftists are a symptom of the rage caused by the contradictions and problems of capitalism. And
right.
if I just keep clinging to Burke like a life raft in a fucking hurricane, then I not only am I playing defensively politically and historically,
Mm-hmm,
where I'm constantly justifying the institutions from whence we came,
mm,
but also I could get, you might not use this the same way I would, but I'm going to get outflanked by more creative people where we're looking at the world as it is, but we're not asking ourselves a question, can we do better than this? And so I'm effectively making a false binary between the status quo and socialism, but I'm missing that we could just start from scratch and say, here's the status quo, what's better? And then work with that.
Yeah,
Did I misrepresent any part of our conversation or
no,
miss anything
I
substantive
think
that
that's
you want
really
the
good.
audience to understand?
I think that's really good, but I don't think we want to start from scratch. I actually think we want to go back a little bit and have a better sense of history and understand like why these ideas arose the way they did. And so I'm not saying I have all the answers, right? So I'm kind of like fence sitting where I'm like very sympathetic towards the Hegelian Marxist view, but the intelligent version that I think is worthwhile. And then I'm still kind of like a very much a liberal who believes in these institutions and wants to maintain them ardently. And so all I'm saying is that, and I guess we could talk about the debate a bit if you want and how I would like apply this a bit more. But
Yeah, I think we can do that. The only thing that I would ask though is even if you have a dumb idea or a silly idea that you've been playing with about like what we could do better, I would be receptive to hearing it. Just because like um it's intriguing to me that even under the philosophy of Burke, which I think is interestingly, I think it's more robust than you think it is.
right,
But that's because it's easy. Maybe I'm being philosophically lazy, where I'm like, yeah, hold on to institutions, let things increment, and criticize progressives. Boom, easy day.
right.
I would be curious about what your like philosophical alternative is.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Burke. I know I'm like loosely familiar, but that is one problem. But I just think that I think what's powerful about Hegel is that he's. And I'm not even like convinced. I'm not sure, but I think what is possibly really important is that he's really engaging with the liberal tradition, and he's trying to figure out why the liberal tradition is contradictory and stupid all the time. And so,
Mhm.
but he's also a huge liberal, right? So he's trying to
Right.
critique his fellow liberals. He's trying to critique Kant, who's his like greatest
Yeah, his own
teacher.
ideology. Those are the best ideologues, are the ones who are willing to reflect about the flaws in their own
Oh yeah,
ideology. Those are my favorite people.
oh yeah, for sure, yeah. And that's I just think that when you hold on to Burke, possibly again, I don't want to speak too strongly because I'm not an expert, but I think the danger is that I wanted to make this point about Marx in the 18th Brumaire. At the end and the beginning, he basically brings up like Victor Hugo, and so Victor Hugo obviously is famous for writing Les Miserables. He was like a big French intellectual, and he was a liberal. And so what he said was, "Wow, this Louis Bonaparte guy is horrible. Why did he just declare himself emperor and get rid of liberalism? This guy's a freak. I hate this guy." And but he also kind of implied that Louis Bonaparte just came out of nowhere. Like he just was a lightning bolt. There's like a quote. He like wrote like a whole like article about it. He was like really upset, as writers are. They just write an article to express their pain and suffering. And he wrote a whole article where he was like, "This guy came out of nowhere. He ruined my liberalism." And what Marx said was, "You absolute buffoon, you child." Okay, what do you mean he just came out of nowhere? You have to figure out where he's coming from. Where does he come from? What is the historical process that makes this absolute buffoon the leader of France? How is that possible,
Right.
right? And so,
Oh, ow. Oh. Oh, you just hurt me.
how did I do that? How did I hurt you?
Ah. Ah. Fuck. Sorry, who's the author of Les Mis?
Victor Hugo.
Victor Hugo. Ah, fuck, I'm Hugo.
You might be.
Ah.
You might be.
Oh, this
You
hurts.
might be. It's possible.
Dude, I just had like
He wrote it.
in
We
Warhammer
still read
40K
him.
turns,
We still read him. Like that's
you
not a
you
bad
have like
place to
a
be.
synaptic backlash, which is where like the death of another psychic animal hurts you. That's
Right.
what just happened to me. So I just felt Victor Hugo get absolutely fucking annihilated. And then I was like, "Oh shit, I'm
Yeah.
repeating his behavior in the modern context of Trump."
I know.
No, 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 that being said though, okay, so I don't think I'm as dumb as I thought I was 5 seconds ago.
Okay.
Um
That's good.
this rage doesn't come from nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
I understand where the rage comes from, weirdly enough. I actually think I can probably describe fairly accurately where the rage of Trump comes from. Now maybe I'm being too elitist, but I think a lot of it is stupidity. But anyways, let's allow me continue with your point. I'm still going to be taking psychic damage on that point,
Right.
and I will be hurting for the next 5 to 10
It's not
minutes.
just like figuring out why people supported him, but also what is the historical process that made this necessary? Because this is a point where Hegel comes in.
Right.
So Hegel thought that like historical developments, again, they weren't random; they had a necessity to them. So Caesar, Hegel would say Caesar was an idiot who was self-interested, but also Caesar had a necessary role to play in the development of history. And so that's an important point,
Yeah.
is that Marx agrees with that Hegelian point. And so it's not just that people supported Louis Bonaparte, it's that history supports Louis Bonaparte. There's something about Louis Bonaparte that allowed him to lead France, and that's not just an accident. There has to be a historical, and this is the part that I'm not sure I agree with, because there's a part of me that
This
says,
can
go on.
Sorry, can I posit, even if you don't agree with it fully, can I posit a description and for why Trump is currently president, and you can kind of tell me if you think it's like a fair thing, a fair reading.
Sure, yeah.
So I feel like um, capitalism is wildly powerful. It's wildly powerful. And there's a contradiction within the foundation of America,
Mm-hmm.
which is effectively that, like, we are supposed to look after ourselves and that we have built self interest into liberalism and built self interest into capitalism. But the weird thing about it is that self interest is ultimately, it can be competitive, but weirdly enough, it's also collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we send we like Americans always wanted to be isolationists. They never wanted a large standing army, at least in the beginning. In the 19th century, they didn't want one. But what happened is when you send merchant ships into the Mediterranean and they start getting attacked by Barbary pirates, you have to respond to that unless you want your merchant ships to just be endlessly attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And so we start this international military and adventurism that's contrary to our ideological position of self-interest. And then that kind of culminates in the nationalist catastrophe of World War II, where all of these nation states are so self-interested that they destroy each other in the worst apocalypse that we've ever seen in history, one of the worst military and economic apocalypses in world history.
Right.
And so what America says, in my opinion, after World War II, is we say, well, we can't let that happen again, and we see socialism kind of taking root in the world the same way that we saw national socialism and in Japanese imperialism taking root. So we need to contest them on all fronts,
Right.
because if we let them grow, then eventually they're going to be a cancer that we have to fight tooth and nail in
Mm-hmm.
some kind of armed conflict. And that's the entire history of the Cold War. Well, the Cold War was never explained to the American people. They
True.
don't
Yeah.
know, or they actually thought that they could just win World War II and go home.
Mm-hmm.
That's what most Americans thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this divergence between the private American culture, which is effectively look after you, enjoy capitalism, buy a ski-doo, get a hot wife, whatever. And then we have this like higher collaborative, militaristic, adventuristic thing happening within the federal government that's totally disassociated from the private market. And so we have this kind of like neo Roman imperialism happening at the federal level, and we still have this individualist libertarian thing happening on the home front. And so that contradiction can't explain Vietnam. It can't explain Grenada. It can't explain Lebanon. It cannot explain Israel. It cannot explain our adventurism with the Middle East and North Africa. And our social elites never explained it to the population. They were never like, hey, oil is the lifeblood of civilization and we're fighting fucking communists, so we need to secure the Middle East and North Africa. They were like, hey, if you're 19, join the military and go shoot commies for mommy and you'll be able to buy a Corvette.
Right.
That was the propaganda.
Right.
And so basically it was never explained to the American people in any kind of way that was actually coherent. And then we just let that momentum carry us into the early 20th century with jihadism. And now, I don't want to say everybody, I believe in the empire because I was raised in the imperial side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But my country doesn't believe in the empire. And so they're kind of collapsing it. And I'm watching it collapse in horror.
Right.
Like it's actually kind of like, last little historical analog. It's kind of like Rome when Western Rome abandoned the Eastern Roman Empire,
Right.
and then like Eastern Rome watched the West be consumed by barbarians.
Mm-hmm.
That's That's the way that I feel. I feel like I'm a Byzantine Roman
Right.
watching the West fall.
Right. Well, you can't. You
Sorry
can't.
if that was a long-winded rant, but that's exactly what I think is happening. And Trump is the perfect encapsulation of this contradiction because he's isolationist, he's self-interested, he's economically protectionist, he's anti-war. He's also like a very self-interested domestic businessman, and he's somebody who dodged the Vietnam draft. He is somebody who dodged the duties of imperial America, and now he's trying to like move imperial America towards his vision of what America should be.
Right. So, I mean, this is where the difference between Hegel and Marx actually comes up, because Hegel actually wrote philosophy is its own time grasped in thought. So he basically thought you can't see the future. Where philosophy is understanding our own moment, our own history. It's not the future. We can't see the future. So Hegel might have heard that explanation, and he would have been like, "It's missing some of the consciousness and spirit and some of the important parts." But that's solid, I guess. That's good. But Marx would say the point is to change it. We have to understand dialectically where this is going, what the contradictions in society are, and of course he would say that the imperial explanation doesn't explain what imperialism comes from, for example, which would be capitalism, and it's not like imperialism is, because again this is where the dangers of the far left come in, because the far left would just say imperialism is bad because it's bad, and it's like capitalists are evil, and so they do evil things, and that's basically their explanation. But actually, there might be a more coherent explanation where you say that imperialism comes out of capitalism because of the needs of spreading your markets, free trade, all of that, and then it starts to be like, okay, maybe they are connected at least in some way, and so that's why
Oh,
Marx would say,
I would say the 18th and 19th century is precisely this history. Is
right,
that the expanding into foreign markets and then protecting your interests in the foreign markets? That explains the East India Trade Company. That explains the
oh yeah,
rush for Africa. That explains the Danish. Is it Danish? There was some like Scandinavian country that had their own India Trade Company, and they were surprisingly corporate and militaristic simultaneously.
hmm, yeah. I mean, that's a big part of it, and there's what I was going to say is that Marx has a line about Louis Bonaparte where he says that he's like, I'm paraphrasing heavily here, but he basically says why an idiot is playing a hero's part. Like this guy is at the top of the world. He's basically moving world history, and he's just some random moron, right? And and so I think this references again Hegel's idea that the dumbest, most self-interested people could move world history, and the reason they can do that is because there's some sort of world spirit, and so it can
And routinely
manifest,
do.
and and it can really manifest in a way where it's like it's the process you're describing, um, and this is where this is kind of leading me into my other point, I guess, is that I think we do need to have this richer view of history, but also what I really want, and kind of what my project is a little bit, and this goes into the debate a bit too, if unless you want to question me on more stuff there, but what I really think we need is a huge reinvigoration of the liberal tradition. And part of that would be being honest about what the Cold War was about. For example, like you mentioned, we got to be honest about that. We got to reinvigorate the liberal tradition, ground it, and explain what it actually is. And then we also need to, I think, in doing so, engage with the socialist tradition, the real socialist tradition. And I think we need to fight each other and figure out what the truth is. And are they right? What is
Yeah,
their explanation of the contradiction? And that is alike to what you want to do when you talk about talking to progressives.
it is.
Yeah,
No, I literally want to build a center left,
yeah,
center right coalition, and I want to. People call me a liberal all the time, and I accept that
hmm,
if you're talking about maximal human freedom being good for society.
for sure.
I don't accept that in the fact that if you do methamphetamine and have orgies all day, I'm not allowed to tell you that I think that's bad behavior. And I swear to God, like a bunch of liberals are just libertine sexual degenerates who don't want to be told what to do.
I think both of those are
I think
part
they
of.
actually.
I think both of those are part of the liberal tradition. Those are both legitimate. So I would say you're a liberal
Yeah.
because like the critical, philosophical, like political organization, you are liberal. You might be a conservative liberal. Those exist, right? There's a ton of those. That's really what the
Yeah.
Republican Party was. Like that's really
A-
what it was.
And there's no contradiction. One of my frustrating parts too is like with Burke. America is a liberal project. So the institutions that I were raised with were philosophically liberal.
Right.
So just because I'm fighting to conserve liberal institutions doesn't mean that it doesn't mean you're not a conservative. If you were arguing that you wanted theocracy, I would almost say that I would use a different term
Mm-hmm.
like traditionalist or something like that, or like a religious theocrat. I wouldn't use conservative because the truth is we don't live in a theocracy right now.
Right.
So you're not fighting to conserve an existing theocracy. You're fighting to institute a theocracy. So I would use a totally different term. But unfortunately, like because of our inaccuracy with words,
Mm-hmm.
even having these conversations is difficult, right?
Yeah.
Because so many words come with like emotional baggage instead of like ideological purity. But
Right.
I'm going to challenge my chat just a little bit while we're moving into the debate and the flaws in the debate. Osimo says that's just industrialism, not capitalism. I would love for you to explain the difference. Then Gen X says the Louis thing is throwing me off, and so we're talking about in the late 18th century, if I have my chronology correct, the French Revolution occurred almost immediately after the American Revolution, and they overthrew the king.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the early 19th century, Napoleon positioned himself as like the warrior of the revolution that was gonna
Mm-hmm.
instantiate this new enlightened rationalist France.
Mm-hmm.
But then he ended up declaring himself emperor and effectively became a dictator. Then he was deposed. Then there was a whole bunch of mess and fights over what were the modernization forces within France. And then what my friend here has said is that Louis is effectively an incompetent nephew of Napoleon who became emperor not through great man of history moments, not through individual competence. He just appealed to all of the anxieties of the day and said, "Hey, I'll fix it." And then he got voted in as I don't know, did he get voted in as emperor or did he
Yep.
get voted in as a
Well,
different
no.
position?
The emperor thing. He just unilaterally declared it because he basically took away all power from
Right.
parliament. He basically dissolved
But
parliament.
what was his title before he was an emperor?
He was the president. So
President.
yeah.
So he was a president and then he declared himself emperor.
Yep.
So the only thing that we're talking about is like sorry if this is a vulgar summary of what we just said. But wildly stupid, incompetent people can be ushered, and I don't know if you really think that about Louis, but wildly incompetent and stupid people can be swept into positions of great power through the forces of history. And like rather than saying, "Oh, that guy is stupid and he sucks," which is true, but it's a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
We should look at the historical forces that swept that dumb person into the position of power. And that's why I went on a 5-minute description of the Cold War contradictions of American empire
Right.
and American domestic
Mm-hmm.
consumer culture.
Louis was his nephew, Napoleon the Third. If you look up Napoleon the Third, that's the guy I'm talking about. No one talks about
Yeah.
the second. Um, yeah, I mean the only thing is that it's not just like a force of history. For Marx, it's that the capitalist system has evolved and changed to where this kind of leader is actually good because he will appeal to the different forces in society and harness them to like run the state in the most effective way, and so it's like the necessary development because of the way that capitalism was evolving at the time. So that's part of the argument there. But yeah,
Yeah. So extrapolating it, I can't promise that I'm not going to go back to useless drama on Monday. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
the truth is that I am slave to the vulgar masses. All right. So we were at 300 yesterday when we were talking about Destiny sex drama and the fallout from the debate.
Mm,
We were at like close to 200 today when we're talking about Hassan talking about the drama. Now that we're talking about the foundational philosophical things that support the world that in which we live
mm-hmm.
and the historical forces that swing back and forth, we're around 100. Now that's not an insult to your intellect. That's just the truth
Right.
that people love vulgar sex drama
Mm-hmm.
and vulgar clashes of personalities.
Right. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that's true. I think there's a way to apply all of this in an entertaining and like boiled down way. I don't think we have to have. I am not prescribing Connor. I need you to retire from drama. I need you to do philosophical lessons.
And you exclusively need to
Yeah,
talk to hyper intelligent
yeah.
book nerds
You
about
need to
political
you
philosophy,
need to start reading
which, by
Heidegger.
the
Let
way,
me know.
I would, especially if it paid the bills. But,
Yeah, but I'm actually saying that I think, and maybe it's not possible, but I think the way that the drama is unfolding is really. I mean, part of it's personal stuff that is separate to this, but I think there's really like a way to have these conversations and these political conversations that is richer, and I think it's necessary for the country. Like I think we have to stop
yeah.
circling the drain and repeating these conversations. I think we have to start seeing things in a different way, and I feel like that's kind of like the reinvigoration of these traditions that I'm talking about. Is I really want to see these
So
reinvigorated.
I already see, at least from my perspective, and goddamn you to hell, you might actually make me have to read more books. I see the what you're effectively saying is like I could probably get rich, not gonna lie, just watching Hassan Piker pausing every 5 minutes and calling him stupid.
Right.
But Hassan Piker is that's not gonna solve anything.
Right.
It's barely gonna change anybody's mind. It's
Hmm.
just gonna be entertainment fodder slop for the masses, which, by the way, I have no problems creating. However, if I am actually worried about Hassan Piker, which is why I'm attacking him, I shouldn't just be looking at the man. I should be looking at the historical forces that created the man and made him popular and relevant.
Right.
And then that is actually where my leverage should be addressed. Because if I just keep attacking the man and his ideas, but I don't ameliorate, big word, the conditions that created him,
Right.
then I'm fucked.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think my other point is that I think socialists have a really good they're a good fighter in this story. They have a good critique, but I think unfortunately due to the 20th century and the Cold War and maybe just I don't know how people boil down ideas, like socialism has all of the worthwhile critiques have just gotten evaporated. And now it's just become I hate rich people, I hate this thing, I hate white people maybe. Like I just hate random things, and that's just not a worthwhile critique and I haven't changed my mind on that at all. It's absolutely worthless and pointless. But I think if we can
Well,
make
the
tiny
point is,
steps.
in my opinion, is to motivate the masses to action, along these
Yeah,
lines.
this is the question.
But I understand that it's not going to be productive. It's actually probably going to be
This is
horrific.
a question that I've been thinking about because I'm not sure, but I would like to think that there's a way to reinvigorate popular political movements through this idea. Because I do think that if we really think about who's leading the movements, right? Do we really think the Democrats are motivating people with their empty rhetoric? Like they're doing the drama slop basically, but they have no principles. The Republicans, sure, they're motivating people, but like, do we really think the Republicans can like motivate a world historical process for like decades and centuries? Like, do we think that MAGAism is
No,
going to be like the prevailing philosophy in 100 years? Like, probably not, right? So, I think that there.
no, and my frustration of the people is the same frustration that I hear repeated over and over and over again, which is effectively that with the Republicans, at least in my opinion, their rhetoric is fine. Pro family, pro
Right,
entrepreneurialism, pro capitalism, pro bootstrap, pro this, pro that. That motivates me just fine. But when it comes to actual policy, in order to create a mildly socially or fiscally conservative society, their only policy is tax cuts. And then when it comes to Democrats, I hear often from progressives and lefties in my chat, it's like, yeah, it's cool that like white people and white liberals and progressives decided to be slightly less racist than they were 20 years ago, but you haven't addressed like police brutality, income
right,
inequality, the threats of environmental catastrophe, and all that kind of stuff. And so part of the problem is that like a representative democracy is incredibly complex in order to get
right,
legislation passed. But I also think that, at least from an exterior perspective, it seems like these politicians, once they get into a representative position, they're actually not motivated to fix anything
right.
because they're effectively fixing the mandates that got them into office in the first place.
Exactly.
And so we're not really engaged in a technocratic execution of American problems.
Hmm.
We're involved in a popularity contest for who has the better complaints about modern society.
Right. And that's why I think. reinvigorating these philosophical discourses is the only way we can remake society. And remaking society might mean just preserving liberalism more. Like that might be the answer. That's like emotionally that's the answer I want. It might mean socialism. Who knows? I don't know. But I think we have to reinvigorate these philosophical discussions. Otherwise, we are just circling the drain and cycling over and over again on these debates.
Well, let me tell you about my project, and maybe we can become friends on this project. We had hit around an hour and change, and I try to keep these between 60 and 90 minutes. Not that we couldn't talk for the next 6 hours, but I've been live for 5 hours, and so my apologies for number one being late, number two maybe cutting the conversation just as we're getting to prescriptions. However, my project is I'm a small being. Okay, I'm very small. SMOL.
Right.
However, there's signs of growth within my realm of influence where, particularly in the morning where not very many other people are live, I'm hitting 200 or 300, and my chat is very generous. They donate a lot. So the truth is that I expect that if I continue down this path, it is 80-20, 90-10 possible that I might be able to garner a large enough audience to secure a six-figure income from this job of waking up and doing drama slop. However, drama slop mixed with real ideas. But I would take that money and that clout and that attention, and I would 100% do projects parallel to the government that's good for society, but not reliant on the government. And yeah, I will. Um, my wife literally just walked in and was like, "You're 30 minutes late." So the thing is, so part of that though would be like, for instance, you're saying that we need these conversations. I would do like quarterly community meetups where we effectively, like, let's say that mudslides in Western North Carolina, we go to North Carolina, we meet at an airport, we drive out to Western North Carolina. During the day, we do disaster relief. And then at night, we do community events where we all eat pizza and drink beer at whatever hotel is not currently under mud. And so not only did we do something positive for the community that crosses hopefully political distinctions, because we would get liberals and libertarians and conservatarians to participate, but then also we could have like the vulgar drama conversation earlier, but then we could have the serious conversation at night. And that could be like part of the entertainment is you get to meet Counterpoints, Destiny, an Untrodden podcast
True.
talking about Kant and Hegel and, how Marx was a piece of shit and all that kind of shit. And that would be effectively like the project. So
Right.
what do you think about that project, I guess? And what project do you propose?
I think that's really good. Yeah, I think that's a really good kind of. The only thing I would add to that is that I think when we have these conversations, because there's kind of a middle ground, right? You're talking about the drama content, but then there's the debates like you had, and that's kind of a middle ground where it's serious, it has a real political um, element to it, but it's also very drama related. And so I just feel like when we
Like
approach,
wrestling.
yeah, exactly. I just feel like when we approach conversations like that, if we had a more kind of good faith, but also just a fuller sense of what we're talking about, and we really got to like the bare bones foundations of what we're fighting for and what we're doing. I think if there was an approach to do that and have conversations like that, because I think people like you and people on the online politics space really do have a responsibility, because I think future politics is being formed here, and that might seem unlikely, but I do think it's the case that people who are interested in politics when they're younger or on the side of their job or whatever in these streams are the most likely people to have political output in their life, whether it's projects like you're talking about or something else. So I think if we're going to have this kind of political outcome, we really need to take our job seriously, and we really need to ground these things out and have serious conversations. Yeah.
Let me give you a little bit of warning. You walk down uh, overgrown paths. Okay. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?
I'm 21.
21.
Yep.
Okay. Funnily enough, when you were 15 or 16, there were two people that pop into my mind when you say these things. The two people are, which is funny thinking about you, now you're a man. It's funny thinking about you as like a pimply faced teenager engaged in the same shit. So, book smarts, okay?
Mm,
Long dead warrior of the Destiny orbit.
right.
He tried to come in here and he was like, "Hey, I'm a rhetorically gifted dude. I'm smart. I know how to write essays, blah, blah, blah. Let's elevate the discourse by breaking down the arguments." Within 6 months, he wanted to eat a gun because so many
Right.
conversations within this space are so unproductive. Then, and also a lot of the unproductive conversations are oftentimes the most popular because they're the biggest shit shows.
Right.
Then there was Dylan Burns,
Mm-hmm.
who I think to this day still has the best debate format, where effectively he kept the group focused on topic. He asserted his role as a moderator. He would happily mute people, even people many times his clout size, in order to facilitate a conversation. And if there was an issue in reference to definition, or something that we were spinning on, where we just started repeating ourselves over the course of 45 minutes, he would move the conversation forward. Now the problem is that took a Herculean amount of effort, because not only did he need to be charismatic enough to attract people to his panel,
Mm-hmm.
but he needed to be respected enough in order for people to listen to his moderation. And he needed to be entertaining enough to bring people back for the next show.
Right.
And I don't think, oh, wow, thank you. I don't think that anybody has really followed in his footsteps. I even tried it for 6 months, but the truth
Mm-hmm.
is that I wanted to eat a gun.
Right.
And so it's not that it's not possible, and it's not that we shouldn't push forward as an ideal. However, I just want you to be ready for the fact that two of your predecessors engaged in this space, and I believe with you that we could actually be a really good force for good. But them trying to specifically center their mission around that led them to emotional torment and near suicide.
Right. The only thing I would say is that I'm not interested in being nice and like having formal
Sure.
debates so much. So I don't think I'm delusional. I actually think there's a way. I actually like being aggressive. I like fighting with people, believe it or not. So I actually think there's a way to maintain this idea and fight for this idea in kind of a more aggressive way. I think there's a way to make
Mhm.
change by kind of aggressively fighting for things and fighting people, and also fight for more good faith, intelligent conversation at the same time. That's just so I
Oh,
did
if you
think.
bully the shit out of dumb people, I will watch your career with great interest. If you are capable of talking about political philosophy to this caliber, but you are also capable of getting down in the mud and throwing elbows at stupid people, I will watch. If you have a fantastic conversation with a brilliant person that you cover all the ground or whatever, I'll break that down. And if you have a stupid conversation where you elbow somebody in the temple and they get knocked out rhetorically, I will of course watch that as well. So if you're
Right.
a versatile creator, then
Yeah,
that's a strength.
I think so. But yeah, I really think there's a way to kind of make change in that way. And obviously, I can't do it on my own. I'm not gonna like revolutionize things. So I am trying to convince you and I guess your chat to just kind of like keep this in mind and think about it. And yeah, that is my message as an
We
ambassador.
will. My my normal stream numbers. I'm not trying to focus on numbers too much, but even like a month ago, my normal stream numbers were like 50 to 70. Then they started bumping up to 100, and now I would say if I'm talking about like routine drama, I'm gonna get around 100. And then if there's a spicy drama, we have of course hit like larger numbers or whatever. However, what I would say is that I have a core of motivated, we call them grill hottists, people who love
Right.
grilling,
Mm-hmm.
people who love being normal.
Right.
And none of us are normal. We're all autistic as shit. But like we all want America to do well. We all want to work our jobs. We want to pay our bills. We want to pay our taxes. We want to take care of our communities and all that kind of stuff. And that seems to be the people that I'm recruiting.
Right.
So if you ask the broader drama community to say, hey, Untrodden Podcast wants us to elevate our conversations, they're going to tell you to go fuck yourselves.
Right.
But the grill hottists will support this mission.
Well, yeah, I'll count you as my first constituency, my first alliance. That's awesome. All right.
Then basically a year from now, I want you to grow your content to the point that we're going to Western North Carolina because of more mudslides, and then we go help people move debris, and we deliver water and food for 8 hours, and then we have like a 3 hour beer and pizza fueled debate about Kantian philosophy and whether or not Marxists should kill themselves. That would be
Exactly.
an ideal for me.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we can argue about Burke and Kant. Kant
All
versus
right, cool.
Burke. Yeah.
Well, my wife brought me a Sprite and told me that I'm late, so I think
Right.
I have to go. However,
Understand.
we can absolutely do this again. Can
Yeah,
you
cool.
please tell people who you are and where they can find you?
Yeah, so my name's Dylan. I run the Untrodden podcast. Uh, yeah, so far I've only been talking to Marxists. So if you want to learn more about Marxism and see me kind of question them and ask them some questions from a liberal perspective, Check that out. I do actually really want to talk to other kinds of people. I don't want to just be the liberal ambassador to Marxism, although that's nice. It's a good start. So if anyone has any suggestions or any idea to get in contact with people who might want to talk to me and that sort of thing, I'm super interested in that. And yeah, I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. I'm sorry for fucking up the timetable twice, but I'm happy we got to have this
Me too.
conversation.
Yeah,
So,
it was great.
parasocial love, bud. I
Yep,
hope you have a beautiful day. DM me if there's a topic that you want to talk about in the future, and I will
for
also try
sure.
to help facilitate you infiltrating the political community.
All right, yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Have a good one, bud.
You too.